Sarah Martinez walked into the small coffee shop on Fifth Street, her worn sneakers making no sound on the wooden floor. She had learned to move quietly during her 8 years in the Navy, but now that training served a different purpose. She didn't want to draw attention to herself in this new town where nobody knew her past. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. Sarah chose a corner seat where she could see both the entrance and the back exit. Old habits never died, even though she had been out of service for 6 months now. "What can I get you today?" asked the young barista with bright pink hair and a warm smile. "Just black coffee, please," Sarah replied softly. She had stopped adding sugar and cream years ago during her military training. Simple and effective had become her way of life. As she waited for her coffee, Sarah noticed 3 men at a table near the window. They were loud and rowdy, clearly having had too much to drink despite it being only 10 in the morning. Their voices carried across the small space, filled with crude jokes and harsh laughter. The barista, whose name tag read Emma, brought Sarah her coffee with slightly shaking hands. Sarah could see the worry in the young woman's eyes as she glanced toward the 3 men. "Are they bothering you?" Sarah asked quietly. Emma nodded nervously. "They've been here for an hour. They keep making comments and won't leave when I ask them to. My manager isn't here today, and I don't know what to do." Sarah felt a familiar stirring in her chest. During her time as a Navy SEAL, she had protected innocent people in dangerous situations around the world. The instinct to help was still strong, even though she now worked as a mechanic at a small garage across town. "Don't worry about them," Sarah said calmly. "Just keep doing your job." The 3 men suddenly burst into louder laughter, and one of them called out, "Hey, pretty girl with the pink hair, come over here and talk to us." Emma's face went pale. She looked around the empty coffee shop desperately, but there was nowhere to hide. The morning rush had ended, and she was alone except for Sarah and the troublesome customers. "I'm working," Emma called back politely. "I need to stay behind the counter." "We're customers too," shouted the biggest of the 3 men. He had a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos. "Customer service means serving the customers, right, boys?" His 2 friends laughed and nodded. One was tall and thin with greasy hair, while the other was shorter but heavily built. They all wore dirty work clothes and had the smell of alcohol hanging around them like a cloud. Sarah sipped her coffee slowly and watched. She had seen this type of situation many times before. These men were looking for trouble, and they had found a target they thought was helpless. They had no idea that the quiet woman in the corner had spent years training to handle much worse threats. The bearded man stood up and walked toward the counter, swaying slightly as he moved. His friends followed behind him, grinning like wolves hunting prey. "Listen here, pink hair," the bearded man said, leaning across the counter. "We've been very patient customers. We bought coffee, we sat quietly, and now we want some company. Is that too much to ask?" Emma stepped back against the wall behind the counter. "Please, I just want to do my job. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble," laughed the tall, thin man. "Who said anything about trouble? We're friendly guys just looking for conversation." Sarah could see Emma's hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the counter. The young woman was trapped with nowhere to run. The 3 men blocked her path to the front door, and Sarah knew there was likely no back exit from behind the counter. "Maybe we should go somewhere more private to talk," suggested the shorter, heavy-set man. "You could take a little break from work." "No, thank you," Emma said firmly, though her voice trembled. "I need to stay here." The bearded man reached across the counter suddenly, trying to grab Emma's arm. She jerked away, but he was persistent and tried again. "Don't touch me," Emma said loudly. "Now, don't be like that," the bearded man replied. "We just want to be friends." Sarah had seen enough. She stood up slowly, leaving her coffee on the table. The 3 men were so focused on intimidating Emma that they didn't notice the quiet woman approaching from behind. "Excuse me," Sarah said in a calm, clear voice. All 3 men turned around, surprised to see someone else in the coffee shop. They had been so focused on their target that they had forgotten about the other customer. Well, well, said the tall, thin man with a nasty grin. Looks like pink hair has a friend. Maybe we can have a party. Sarah looked at each man carefully, assessing their size, strength, and likely fighting ability. The bearded man was the biggest threat due to his size and aggressive attitude. The tall man was probably quick, but not very strong. The shorter man was built like a boxer, but seemed to follow the other's lead rather than making his own decisions. The lady behind the counter asked you to leave her alone, Sarah said quietly. I think you should respect that request. The bearded man laughed loudly. And who's going to make us, sweetheart? You. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued to study the three men, planning her response if the situation escalated. She hoped it wouldn't come to violence, but her training had taught her to always be prepared. Please just leave, Sarah said. There's no need for this to get worse. Worse? The bearded man stepped closer to Sarah. Listen, lady, we were here first. We're paying customers, and we could talk to whoever we want. If you don't like it, you can leave. Behind the counter, Emma watched in fear as the confrontation developed. She had hoped the quiet woman would call the police, not try to face the three men alone. It seemed like a hopeless situation was about to become a dangerous one. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah replied calmly. And neither should she have to feel uncomfortable at her own job. The tall, thin man moved to Sarah's left while the shorter man moved to her right. They were trying to surround her, a basic intimidation tactic that Sarah recognized immediately. In their minds, one small woman against three grown men was an easy victory. You know what? Said the bearded man, his voice getting uglier. Maybe you need to learn some manners. Maybe we need to teach both of you ladies how to show proper respect to men. Sarah felt her muscles tense slightly, but her face remained calm. During her SEAL training, she had learned to control her emotions and reactions under pressure. Fear and anger made people make mistakes, while calm thinking led to better outcomes. Last chance, Sarah said quietly. Walk away now, and everyone goes home happy. The three men looked at each other and burst into laughter. The idea that this small, quiet woman could pose any threat to them seemed like the funniest joke they had heard all day. You hear that, boys? The bearded man said to his friends. She's giving us a last chance. Isn't that sweet? Real sweet, agreed the tall, thin man. Maybe we should give her a last chance too. Last chance to apologize and mind her own business. Sarah shook her head slowly. I can't do that. The bearded man's expression suddenly turned angry. Then, you're going to regret sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. He reached out to grab Sarah's shoulder, probably intending to push her around or intimidate her into backing down. In his experience, most people back down when faced with physical intimidation. But Sarah Martinez was not most people. The moment the bearded man's hand moved toward her, Sarah's training took over. 8 years of Navy SEAL combat experience flowed through her muscles like water through a riverbed. Her response was swift, precise, and devastating. Sarah caught the bearded man's reaching hand with her left hand while simultaneously driving her right elbow into his solar plexus. The blow knocked all the air from his lungs and sent him stumbling backward, gasping and wheezing. The tall, thin man tried to grab Sarah from behind, but she had already sensed his movement. She spun around and delivered a perfect knee strike to his stomach, followed by a palm strike to his nose. Blood spurted from his nostrils as he fell backward into a table, sending chairs flying. The shorter, heavy-set man hesitated for a moment, shocked by how quickly his two friends had been neutralized. That moment of hesitation cost him any chance of success. Sarah moved forward and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the floor. Before he could get up, she placed her foot on his chest and applied just enough pressure to keep him down. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. Emma stared in amazement from behind the counter. The three men who had been terrorizing her moments before were now groaning on the floor or struggling to breathe. The quiet woman who had been sitting alone in the corner had somehow defeated all three of them without even breathing hard. Are you okay? Sarah asked Emma, not taking her eyes off the three men. Yes, how did you? Emma stammered, unable to find words for what she had just witnessed. Sarah looked down at the bearded man, who was still trying to catch his breath. I think you gentlemen should leave now. The tall, thin man struggled to his feet, holding his bleeding nose. You crazy woman. You broke my nose. You'll live, Sarah replied without sympathy. But you won't if you don't leave right now. The shorter man tried to get up, but Sarah applied a little more pressure with her foot. Stay down until your friends are ready to go. Then all three of you leave together and don't come back. You can't do this, the bearded man wheezed. We'll call the cops. We'll sue you. Sarah smiled coldly. Go ahead. Call them. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about three grown men threatening a young woman at her job. I'm sure the security cameras will tell an interesting story. For the first time, the three men looked around and noticed the small cameras mounted in the corners of the coffee shop. Their aggressive behavior had been recorded, while Sarah's actions could easily be seen as self-defense. The bearded man slowly got to his feet, still holding his stomach where Sarah had struck him. He looked at his friends, then back at Sarah. The fight had gone out of him completely. This isn't over, he said weakly. Yes, it is, Sarah replied firmly. If any of you come back here or bother this young woman again, things will go much worse for you. Do you understand? The three men gathered themselves together and stumbled toward the door. The tall, thin man was still holding his bloody nose, while the shorter man limped slightly from his fall. The bearded man looked back once with hatred in his eyes, but he said nothing more. After they left, Sarah turned to Emma, who was still staring in shock. Are you really okay? Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded slowly. I can't believe what just happened. How did you do that? Are you a police officer or something? Sarah picked up her coffee cup from the table where she had left it. The coffee was still warm. I used to be in the military. Sometimes old training comes in handy. Used to be in the military? Emma repeated. What did you do in the military? Sarah took a sip of her coffee. Just a soldier. Nothing special. But Emma could tell there was more to the story. Normal soldiers didn't fight like that. Normal soldiers didn't move with such speed and precision. Normal soldiers didn't defeat three men without even breathing hard. Well, thank you, Emma said sincerely. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here. You don't need to thank me, Sarah replied. Just doing what anyone would do. But Emma knew that wasn't true. Most people would have called the police and hoped for the best. Most people wouldn't have risked their own safety to help a stranger. And definitely, most people couldn't have handled three aggressive men the way Sarah had. Sarah finished her coffee and left money on the table, including a generous tip. Take care of yourself, Emma. As Sarah walked toward the door, Emma called after her. Wait, what's your name? Sarah paused at the door. Sarah, will you come back? I'm in for coffee. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Emma had seen from her. Maybe. This is a nice place. After Sarah left, Emma stood alone in the coffee shop, still trying to process what had happened. She looked at the overturned chairs and the small spots of blood on the floor where the tall man's nose had bled. In a few minutes, she would clean up the mess and call her manager to report the incident. But first, she would replay the scene in her mind over and over, try to understand how the quiet woman named Sarah had moved so quickly and fought so effectively. Emma had seen action movies, but this was different. This had been real, and it had been devastating. Meanwhile, Sarah walked down Fifth Street toward the garage where she worked. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the streets were filling with people heading to their jobs. No one who saw her would guess that she had just been in a fight. She looked like any other working woman walking to her job. But Sarah's mind was racing. She had tried so hard to leave her military life behind, to blend in and live quietly in this small town. She had hoped that her days of violence and conflict were over. Yet when she saw someone in trouble, all her training and instincts had taken over automatically. Sarah wondered if she would ever truly be able to escape what she had been. She had served her country with pride and distinction, but the skills that made her an effective Navy SEAL were not easy to turn off. She was trained to protect the innocent and fight against those who would do harm. As she reached the garage, Sarah's boss, Tom, was already working under the hood of an old pickup truck. He was a good man in his 60s who had hired Sarah based on her mechanical skills rather than asking too many questions about her background. "Morning, Sarah," Tom called out. "Ready for another day of making these old engines purr?" "Always ready," Sarah replied, putting on her work coveralls. But as she picked up her tools and began working on a car's transmission, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the coffee shop. She had revealed her capabilities to defend someone who needed help. But what if word spread? What if people started asking questions about her past? Sarah had come to this town to start fresh, to build a simple life away from the complexities and dangers of her military service. She wanted to be just Sarah the mechanic, not Sarah the Navy SEAL. She wanted to fix cars and live quietly without having to fight or hurt people. But life had a way of finding people like Sarah, no matter how much they try to hide. Her training and her instincts were part of who she was, and she couldn't simply turn them off when innocent people needed protection. As the morning passed, and Sarah worked on various cars and trucks, she found herself wondering about Emma. Was the young woman safe? Would the three men really stay away, or would they come back for revenge? Sarah had given them a clear warning, but some people were too stupid or too angry to listen to warnings. Around lunchtime, Tom came over to where Sarah was working. "You seem distracted today. Everything okay?" Sarah looked up from the engine she was rebuilding. Tom had been kind to her, giving her a job when she needed one and never prying into her personal life. She didn't want to lie to him, but she also couldn't tell him the whole truth. "Just thinking about some things," Sarah said. "Nothing to worry about." Tom nodded and started to walk away, then stopped. "Sarah, I don't know much about your past, and I don't need to. But I want you to know that if you ever need help with anything, I'm here. You're a good worker and a good person, and good people should look out for each other." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest at Tom's words. It had been a long time since anyone had offered to help her without wanting something in return. "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that." After Tom left, Sarah continued working, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the coffee shop and to Emma's grateful smile. She had spent years protecting people as part of her military service, but this felt different. This was personal, not professional. This was about choosing to help someone because it was the right thing to do, not because she had been ordered to do it. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah made a decision. When her shift ended, she would go back to the coffee shop to check on Emma. Not because she expected trouble, but because she wanted to make sure the young woman felt safe. It was the right thing to do. When 5 o'clock came, Sarah cleaned her hands and changed out of her work clothes. She said goodbye to Tom and walked back toward 5th Street. The coffee shop would probably be busy with the evening crowd, but Sarah wanted to see that Emma was okay. As she approached the coffee shop, Sarah could see through the windows that it was indeed busy. Several customers sat at tables, and there was a line at the counter. Emma was working with another employee, an older woman who was probably the manager Sarah had heard about. Sarah entered the shop and joined the line. When her turn came, Emma looked up and broke into a huge smile. "Sarah, you came back. I promised I might," Sarah said. "How has your day been?" "Much better, thanks to you," Emma replied. "My manager was so grateful when I told her what happened. She said you probably saved the shop from a lot of trouble." Sarah ordered another black coffee and found a table where she could observe the shop without being too obvious about it. She wanted to make sure Emma felt safe, but she also wanted to see if the three men from the morning might return. As she sat and sipped her coffee, Sarah noticed that several customers glanced at her curiously. Word had apparently spread about the morning's incident, and people were trying to figure out who the mysterious woman was who had defeated three men single-handedly. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention. She had hoped to help Emma quietly and then return to her anonymous life, but it seemed that wasn't going to be possible. Small towns love to talk, and a story like this would spread quickly. After finishing her coffee, Sarah approached the counter to say goodbye to Emma. "Thank you for coming back," Emma said quietly. "It means a lot to know that someone cares." "Take care of yourself," Sarah replied. "And Remember, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you feel helpless. As Sarah left the coffee shop, she didn't notice the man sitting in a car across the street. He had been there for an hour, watching and waiting. He was one of the three men from the morning, the shorter, heavy-set one who had followed the other's lead. Unlike his friends, who had gone home to nurse their wounds and their pride, this man was planning revenge. He had spent the day thinking about the humiliation he had suffered, and he wanted to make the woman who had done this to him pay for it. He didn't know Sarah's name or where she lived, but he had seen her come and go from the coffee shop twice now. If he waited long enough, he would get his chance to even the score. Sarah walked home to her small apartment, unaware that she was being watched. She lived simply with just the basic necessities and very few personal possessions. She had learned during her military service that carrying too much baggage, physical or emotional, only slowed you down. As she prepared a simple dinner, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had tried to start a new life away from violence and conflict, but violence had found her anyway. The question now was whether this was just an isolated incident or the beginning of something bigger. Sarah ate her dinner in silence, watching the news on her small television. The world was full of conflict and trouble, just as it had always been. Part of her missed the clarity of her military service, where the good guys and bad guys were clearly identified, and the mission was always clear. In civilian life, things were more complicated. People were more complicated. The three men from the coffee shop probably weren't evil, just foolish and aggressive. They had families and jobs and problems of their own, but that didn't excuse their behavior or make it acceptable to threaten innocent people. As night fell, Sarah prepared for bed, following the same routine she had maintained for years. She checked the locks on her door and windows, noted the locations of all possible exits, and placed her clothes where she could reach them quickly if needed. Old habits from her military service died hard, and Sarah had learned that being prepared was better than being sorry. She had no reason to expect trouble, but she had also learned that trouble didn't always give advance warning. Sarah lay in bed thinking about Emma and hoping the young woman would be safe. She thought about Tom and his offer of help and how good it felt to have someone care about her well-being. She thought about the three men and wondered if they had learned their lesson or if they would cause more problems. Most of all, Sarah thought about her future in this small town. She had hoped to build a quiet, peaceful life here, but today's events had shown her that she might not be able to escape her past completely. The question was whether she was willing to accept that and find a way to use her skills to help others, or whether she should move on and try to find peace somewhere else. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she didn't know that across town, one of the men she had defeated was making plans for revenge. She didn't know that her quiet life was about to become much more complicated. And she didn't know that very soon she would need all of her Navy SEAL training to protect not just herself, but others who couldn't protect themselves. The events at the coffee shop had been just the beginning of Sarah's story in this small town. The real test of her skills and her character was still to come. 3 days after the coffee shop incident, Sarah was working late at Tom's garage when she heard a car pull up outside. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and the shop had been closed for 2 hours. Tom had gone home to his family, leaving Sarah to finish rebuilding an engine that needed to be ready by morning. Sarah looked up from her work as she heard car doors slam shut. Through the garage's grimy windows, she could see headlights illuminating the empty parking lot. Something felt wrong about the situation. Customers didn't usually come by this late, and anyone with car trouble would call rather than just showing up. Sarah quietly set down her wrench and moved closer to the window. She could see 4 men getting out of a dark sedan. Even in the dim light, she recognized one of them as the shorter, heavy-set man from the coffee shop confrontation. He had apparently brought reinforcements. Sarah's training immediately kicked in. She assessed her situation quickly and professionally. She was alone in the garage with limited exits. The main entrance was locked, but these men could easily break the glass door. There was a back exit that led to an alley, but she didn't know if they had positioned someone there as well. The smart move would be to call the police and wait for help, but Sarah knew that response time in this small town could be 15 minutes or more. A lot could happen in 15 minutes, and she couldn't be sure these men would wait patiently for law enforcement to arrive. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and quickly dialed 911 while moving toward the back of the garage. She spoke quietly but clearly to the dispatcher, giving her location and a brief description of the situation. The dispatcher promised to send officers immediately, but Sarah knew she needed to be prepared to handle things herself. The men outside were talking in low voices, probably planning their approach. Sarah used the time to survey her surroundings and identify anything that could be used as a weapon if needed. The garage was full of tools and heavy equipment, but most of it was too bulky to be useful in close combat. Sarah picked up a heavy wrench and slipped it in her belt, then moved to a position where she could see both the front and back exits. She turned off the main lights, leaving only the small work light over her engine project. If the men came inside, she wanted every advantage possible. A loud crash from the front of the garage told Sarah that her visitors had decided to make their entrance. Glass shattered as someone threw a rock through the front window, followed by the sound of the door being forced open. "We know you're in here," shouted a voice Sarah didn't recognize. "Come out and face us like a man." Sarah almost smiled at the irony of being told to face them like a man. These men had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought they were hunting a helpless woman, but they had actually cornered one of the most dangerous people they could have chosen. "There's nowhere to run," called another voice. "We checked the back already." Sarah's heart sank slightly. If they had someone covering the rear exit, her escape options were limited. But she had been in worse situations during her military service, and she had always found a way to complete her mission and survive. The men entered the garage cautiously, using their phone flashlights to pierce the darkness. Sarah could see there were indeed 4 of them, including the man from the coffee shop. The others were strangers, but they moved with the confidence of people who thought they had overwhelming advantages. "Listen up," called the apparent leader, a tall man with a shaved head and multiple tattoos. "You embarrassed our friend here the other day. That was a mistake. We're here to teach you some respect." Sarah remained silent and motionless in her hiding spot behind a large tool cabinet. She could see the men clearly, but they couldn't see her. She counted their weapons and assessed their positioning. 2 of them carried baseball bats, while one had what looked like a crowbar. The 4th man, her original coffee shop adversary, was apparently unarmed. "Maybe she already ran," suggested one of the men with a bat. "Maybe she's not as tough as she thinks." "She's here," said the man from the coffee shop firmly. "I saw her car outside. She can't hide forever." Sarah realized they were right about one thing. She couldn't hide indefinitely. The police were coming, but these men might find her before help arrived. She needed to control the situation rather than simply react to it. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the cabinet, moving into the light where the men could see her clearly. She appeared calm and relaxed, her hands visible and empty except for the wrench on her belt. "Gentlemen," Sarah said in a steady voice, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." All 4 men turned toward her, their flashlights creating a blinding glare in her eyes. Sarah resisted the urge to shield her face, knowing that any sign of weakness would encourage them to attack. "No misunderstanding," said the tall leader. "You hurt our friend, and now we're going to hurt you. That's how things work in the real world." "Your friend was threatening an innocent young woman," Sarah replied calmly. "I simply asked him to stop. Things only escalated when he chose to make them escalate." "That's not how he tells it," said one of the men with bats. "He says you attacked him for no reason." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. People often remember situations differently than they actually happened. But I'm sure the security cameras at the coffee shop tell an accurate story. This gave the men pause. They had probably been counting on there being no witnesses to tonight's events, just as they had assumed there were no witnesses to the original incident. "Doesn't matter now," said the leader, though he sounded less confident than before. What matters is that you need to learn your place. And what place is that? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about their reasoning. Women don't fight men, said the man from the coffee shop, speaking for the first time since entering the garage. Women don't embarrass men in front of other people. Women show respect. Sarah felt a familiar anger rising in her chest, the same anger she had felt when witnessing injustice during her military service. These men didn't just want revenge for their bruised egos. They wanted to put her in what they considered her proper place as a woman. I see, Sarah said quietly. So this isn't really about what happened at the coffee shop. This is about your belief that women should be submissive to men. Finally, getting smart, said the leader with a nasty grin. Now we're going to teach you what happens to women who forget their place. Sarah felt her muscles tense as her training prepared her for combat. She had hoped to resolve this situation peacefully, but these men were determined to use violence. They had come here with weapons and backup, which meant they were serious about hurting her. Last chance, Sarah said, echoing her words from the coffee shop. Walk away now, and no one gets seriously injured. The four men burst into laughter. The idea that one woman could threaten four armed men seemed ridiculous to them. They had clearly learned nothing from hearing about their friend's humiliation at the coffee shop. You're brave. I'll give you that, said the leader. Stupid but brave. Sometimes there's not much difference, Sarah replied. The leader raised his crowbar and stepped forward. Time for your education to begin. Sarah's hand moved to the wrench on her belt, but she didn't draw it yet. She wanted to see how they would attack before committing to a strategy. For opponents were more challenging than three, especially in the confined space of the garage. The leader swung his crowbar in a wide arc, aiming for Sarah's head. It was a clumsy, predictable attack that telegraphed itself well in advance. Sarah ducked under the swing and drove her fist into the man's kidney. He gasped and stumbled forward, dropping the crowbar. One of the men with a baseball bat tried to hit Sarah from behind, but she had already moved away from her previous position. The bat whistled through empty air as Sarah spun around and kicked the man in the knee. His leg buckled, and he fell to the concrete floor, his bat clattering away. The second bat-wielding man was more cautious, trying to corner Sarah against the tool cabinet. But Sarah grabbed a heavy socket wrench from the nearby workbench and threw it hard at his face. He raised the bat to block it, which gave Sarah time to close the distance and disarm him. The man from the coffee shop had picked up the dropped crowbar and was approaching Sarah with obvious hesitation. He had seen her skills firsthand and clearly didn't want to face her again, but peer pressure from his friends was pushing him forward. Sarah looked at him with something approaching pity. You really should have learned your lesson the first time. I ain't scared of you, he said, but his shaking voice suggested otherwise. You should be, Sarah replied simply. The man swung the crowbar awkwardly, putting all his strength behind a single desperate blow. Sarah sidestepped easily and grabbed his wrist as it passed, using his own momentum to send him crashing into a stack of oil drums. The crowbar flew from his hand as he hit the metal containers with a loud clang. In less than 30 seconds, all four attackers were on the ground, groaning and holding various injured body parts. Sarah stood in the center of the garage, breathing normally and completely unharmed. She picked up the crowbar and the baseball bats, placing them well out of reach. The police should be here soon, Sarah told the injured man. I suggest you stay exactly where you are until they arrive. The tall leader struggled to sit up, holding his side where Sarah had hit him. This isn't over, he wheezed. We'll find you again. Sarah crouched down next to him, her voice deadly serious. If you come after me again, if you threaten Emma at the coffee shop, if you cause trouble for anyone in this town, I will hunt you down and make you regret every decision you've ever made. Do you understand? Something in Sarah's tone made the man's blood run cold. He was looking into the eyes of someone who had killed before, someone who could kill again without losing sleep over it. This wasn't just an angry woman. This was a trained warrior. Who are you, he whispered. Someone you never should have messed with, Sarah replied. The sound of police sirens in the distance brought relief to the injured attackers and satisfaction to Sarah. She had handled the situation professionally and with appropriate force. No one was seriously injured, but they would all think twice before threatening innocent people again. Officer Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, arrived with backup just as Sarah was explaining the situation to the 911 dispatcher on her phone. The officer was a young man who took his job seriously and listened carefully to Sarah's account of events. "So, they broke into your workplace to assault you?" Officer Martinez asked, taking notes. "That appears to be the case," Sarah confirmed. "I was working late when they forced entry through the front door. I called 911 immediately and defended myself when they attacked." The officer looked around at the 4 injured men, then back at Sarah, who showed no signs of having been in a fight. "You defended yourself against 4 armed men?" "I had good training," Sarah said simply. Officer Martinez interviewed each of the injured men separately, and their stories were confused and contradictory. They couldn't agree on who had started the violence or why they had come to the garage in the first place. Meanwhile, Sarah's story was clear, consistent, and supported by the physical evidence. Tom arrived just as the police were finishing their report. Someone had called him about the break-in, and he hurried over to check on his employee and his business. "Sarah, are you okay? What happened here?" Tom asked, looking around at the broken glass and scattered tools. "I'm fine," Sarah assured him. "Some men decided to settle a grudge from a few days ago. The police have everything under control now." Tom looked at the 4 men being loaded into ambulances and police cars, then back at Sarah. "4 men did this much damage to my garage, but you're not even scratched?" "I was lucky," Sarah said. But Tom could see that luck had nothing to do with it. The damage to his garage was minimal, just a broken window and some scattered tools. The real damage had been done to the men who had come here looking for trouble. After the police and paramedics left, Tom and Sarah worked together to clean up the garage and board up the broken window until it could be properly repaired. "Sarah," Tom said as they finished sweeping up the glass, "I don't know what kind of training you had before you came here, and I don't need to know. But I want you to know that you've got a job here as long as you want it." "Thank you, Tom," Sarah said sincerely. "That means a lot. I also want you to know that if anyone else comes around here causing trouble, you have my full support to handle it however you see fit." Sarah looked at her boss with surprise. "You're not concerned about liability or bad publicity?" Tom shook his head firmly. "I'm concerned about good people being able to live their lives without being threatened by bullies. You did the right thing today, just like you did at the coffee shop." Sarah realized that Tom knew more about the coffee shop incident than he had let on. In a small town, word traveled fast, especially when it involved an exciting story like a mysterious woman defeating multiple attackers. "People are talking," Tom continued. "They want to know who you are and where you came from. Some folks are curious, some are grateful, and some are probably a little scared." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Me? I'm impressed, and I'm glad you're on the side of good people." As they finished cleaning up, Sarah reflected on how her simple plan to live quietly had completely fallen apart. In less than a week, she had been involved in 2 violent confrontations, and word was spreading throughout the community about her abilities. Sarah drove home that night, wondering what would happen next. The 4 men from tonight would probably face criminal charges for breaking and entering, assault, and intimidation. They would likely leave her alone from now on, but what about others who might see her as a threat or a challenge? During her military service, Sarah's identity had been clear. She was a Navy SEAL, part of an elite unit with a specific mission. Her role was defined and supported by the institution she served. But now she was just Sarah Martinez, auto mechanic, trying to live a normal civilian life. Except normal civilians didn't defeat 4 armed men without breaking a sweat. Normal civilians didn't have the kind of training that made them dangerous in hand-to-hand combat. As Sarah pulled into her apartment complex, she noticed a familiar car in the parking lot. Emma from the coffee shop was sitting on the steps leading to Sarah's building, clearly waiting for her. Sarah parked and approached the young woman, who stood up nervously when she saw her coming. "Emma, what are you doing here?" How did you know where I live? I asked around, Emma said. I heard about what happened at the garage tonight. People are saying 4 men attacked you, and you fought them all off. People like to exaggerate, Sarah replied carefully. But it's true, isn't it? Just like what happened at the coffee shop was true. Sarah studied Emma's face in the parking lot lighting. The young woman looked excited rather than frightened, which was unexpected. Why are you here, Emma? Emma took a deep breath before answering. Because I want to learn how to fight like you do. I want you to teach me. Sarah was completely taken aback by this request. Emma, I can't teach you to fight. It's not that simple. Why not? You learn somehow. You didn't just magically become able to defend yourself. Sarah sat down on the steps, and Emma sat beside her. It was a warm night, and the parking lot was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. What I know took years to learn, Sarah said carefully. It required intense training and dedication. It's not something you pick up in a few lessons. Then, I'll train for years, Emma replied with determination. I'll be dedicated. I never want to feel helpless again like I did when those men were threatening me. Sarah understood Emma's feelings better than the young woman could know. The desire to be strong, to be able to protect yourself and others, was what had driven Sarah to join the military in the first place. Emma, there are martial arts classes and self-defense courses that can teach you basic protection skills. You don't need to become a soldier. But those men came back, didn't they? That's why they attacked you tonight. Basic self-defense wouldn't be enough against people like that. Emma was more perceptive than Sarah had given her credit for. The young woman had correctly identified that the garage attack was connected to the coffee shop incident, and she understood the implications. Even if I could teach you, Sarah said, the kind of training I had changes people. It's not just about learning to fight. It's about being willing to hurt other people when necessary. That's not something everyone can or should do. But you can do it, Emma pointed out. You can hurt people when necessary, but you're still a good person. You used your skills to protect me. Sarah looked at Emma with new respect. The young woman was thinking through the moral complexities of violence and self-defense in a surprisingly mature way. What I have is a specific type of training for a specific type of situation, Sarah explained. I was trained to be a weapon, but I was also trained to use that weapon responsibly and only when necessary. What kind of training was it? Emma asked directly. Sarah hesitated. She had avoided talking about her military background with anyone in town, but Emma was asking direct questions that deserved honest answers. I was a Navy SEAL, Sarah said quietly. Emma's eyes widened in amazement. A Navy SEAL? Like the Special Forces soldiers who fight terrorists and rescue hostages. Something like that, Sarah confirmed. And now you fix cars in a small town? Sarah laughed despite herself. It's not as strange as it sounds. Everyone has to retire eventually, and civilian life requires different skills than military life. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was full of awe. You're like a real-life superhero. I'm not a hero, Sarah protested. I'm just someone with certain skills who tries to use them responsibly. You saved me from those men at the coffee shop, Emma said. You could have minded your own business, but you chose to help. That makes you a hero in my book. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the hero label, but she understood why Emma would see it that way. From a young woman's perspective, Sarah had appeared like an avenging angel to save her from a terrifying situation. Emma, I appreciate what you're saying, but being able to fight doesn't make someone a hero. Heroes are people who do the right thing, even when it's difficult or dangerous. That doesn't require special training. But it helps, doesn't it? Being able to protect yourself and others helps you do the right thing more effectively. Emma had made an excellent point, one that Sarah had wrestled with during her transition to civilian life. Her military training did give her options that other people didn't have, but it also came with responsibilities that other people didn't face. It's late, Sarah said, standing up from the steps. You should go home. We could talk more about this another time if you want. Will you at least think about teaching me some basic skills? Emma asked hopefully. Sarah looked at the young woman's earnest face and felt herself weakening. Emma had been through a traumatic experience, and She was looking for a way to feel empowered and safe. Those were reasonable goals that Sarah could understand and respect. "I'll think about it," Sarah promised. "But I'm not making any commitments." Emma smiled brightly. "That's all I ask. Thank you for considering it." After Emma left, Sarah went up to her apartment and sat in her small kitchen with a cup of tea. The day had brought more complications to her life, but it had also brought some clarity. Sarah was beginning to realize that she couldn't simply walk away from who she was and what she had been trained to do. Her skills were part of her identity, and trying to suppress them completely was like trying to ignore a fundamental part of herself. The question wasn't whether she would use her skills again. Tonight had proven that situations would arise where she had no choice. The question was how she would use those skills and whether she could find a way to use them constructively in her new civilian life. Emma's request to learn self-defense had given Sarah an idea. Maybe there was a way to use her training to help others without returning to the violence and complexity of military service. Maybe she could teach people to protect themselves and others, creating a small network of capable individuals who could stand up to bullies and predators. Sarah had always been most fulfilled when she was helping others and serving a cause larger than herself. Working as a mechanic was honest work, but it didn't give her the sense of purpose that had driven her throughout her military career. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision. She would talk to Emma about basic self-defense training, but she would also explore whether there were others in the community who might benefit from similar instruction. If she was going to be known as the woman who could fight, she might as well use that reputation to help people become safer and more confident. Sarah also decided that she needed to have a conversation with local law enforcement. Officer Martinez seemed like a reasonable person, and it might be beneficial to establish a relationship with the police department. If she was going to continue living in this town, it would be better to have law enforcement as allies rather than strangers who might view her with suspicion. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she felt more settled than she had since arriving in town. She still didn't know exactly what her future would look like, but she was beginning to see a path forward that honored both her desire for a peaceful life and her need to use her skills for good. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions, but Sarah felt ready to face them. She was no longer trying to hide from her past or pretend to be someone she wasn't. She was Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, current auto mechanic, and protector of innocent people who needed help. And she was exactly where she needed to be. 2 weeks after the garage incident, Sarah had settled into a new routine that balanced her day job as a mechanic with evening self-defense classes in the back room of Tom's garage. Word had spread quietly through the community, and a small group of women had approached her about learning basic protection skills. Emma had been her first student, of course, but she had been joined by 3 other women. Maria, a single mother who worked at the local grocery store. Janet, an elderly widow who lived alone. And Rebecca, a college student who commuted to classes in the next town over. Sarah kept the classes simple and practical, focusing on awareness, escape techniques, and basic strikes that could give someone time to get away from an attacker. She was careful not to teach anything too advanced or dangerous, wanting to empower her students without creating unrealistic expectations about their abilities. "Remember," Sarah told her students during one evening session, "the goal is never to win a fight. The goal is to survive and escape. If someone attacks you, your job is to create an opportunity to get away and get help." Emma raised her hand. "But what if you can't get away? What if someone corners you?" "Then you fight back with everything you have," Sarah replied. "But you fight smart, not angry. Anger makes you sloppy. Fear can be useful if you control it instead of letting it control you." Sarah demonstrated a simple palm strike to the nose, showing how a small person could generate enough force to stun a larger attacker. She emphasized technique over strength, teaching her students to use their whole body rather than just their arms. "Practice this motion slowly until it becomes automatic," Sarah instructed. "In a real situation, you won't have time to think about proper form. Your body needs to know what to do without your brain giving it directions." As the weeks passed, Sarah noticed that the classes were having a positive effect on her students beyond just physical skills. Emma stood taller and spoke more confidently at the coffee shop. Maria no longer looked nervously over her shoulder when walking to her car after work. Janet had started taking evening walks around her neighborhood again. The classes had also had an unexpected effect on Sarah herself. Teaching others and seeing their confidence grow reminded her why she had originally joined the military. It wasn't about the excitement of combat or the thrill of danger. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves and making the world a safer place. One evening after class, as Sarah was cleaning up the training area, Officer Martinez appeared at the garage door. She had been expecting this visit for some time, knowing that her activities would eventually come to the attention of local law enforcement. "Evening, Ms. Martinez," the officer said politely. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to have a conversation with you." "Of course," Sarah replied, continuing to put away the training equipment. "What can I help you with?" "I've been hearing interesting things about you," Officer Martinez said. "First the coffee shop incident, then the garage break-in, and now these self-defense classes. People are talking." Sarah looked up from the equipment she was organizing. "Is that a problem?" "Not necessarily," the officer replied. "But it's unusual for someone with your apparent skills to show up in a quiet town like this. It makes people curious about your background." "I used to be in the military," Sarah said simply. "Now I fix cars and help people learn to protect themselves. Nothing mysterious about it." Officer Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "What branch of the military?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then decided on honesty. "Navy. Special Operations." "Navy SEALs?" the officer asked, his eyebrows rising. "Yes." Officer Martinez whistled softly. "That explains a lot. How long were you in?" 8 years, Sarah replied. 3 deployments overseas." The officer was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Why did you leave?" Sarah stopped organizing equipment and looked directly at him. "That's a personal question." "You're right. It is," Officer Martinez admitted. "But when someone with your background settles in my town, I like to know whether they're running from something or towards something." Sarah appreciated the officer's directness. He was asking reasonable questions that she would ask in his position. "I left because 8 years was enough," Sarah said. "I served my country, did my job, and earned an honorable discharge. I came here because I wanted to live quietly and start over." "But you're not living quietly," Officer Martinez pointed out. "You've been in 2 fights, and you're training civilians in combat techniques." "I defended myself and others when threatened," Sarah corrected. "And I'm teaching basic self-defense, not combat techniques." "There's a difference." Officer Martinez nodded. "You're right, there's a difference. I've seen the security footage from the coffee shop, and I read the reports from the garage incident. In both cases, you used minimal force and showed excellent restraint." Sarah felt some tension leave her shoulders. "I'm not looking for trouble, Officer Martinez. I just want to live my life and help people when I can." "That's what I hoped you'd say," the officer replied with a smile. "And please call me David. I think we're going to be working together more than I originally expected." "Working together?" Sarah asked, confused. David looked around the training area, noting the equipment and the setup. "How would you feel about expanding your classes? Maybe offering them through the community center with official city support?" Sarah was surprised by this suggestion. "You want me to teach self-defense classes officially?" "I want you to help make our community safer," David clarified. "We've got a small police force and a lot of territory to cover. If more people know how to protect themselves, it makes everyone safer." "But I'm not a certified instructor," Sarah protested. "I don't have the proper credentials." David shrugged. "You have 8 years of experience with one of the most elite military units in the world. I think that qualifies as proper credentials." Sarah considered the proposal. Official classes would mean more visibility and more responsibility, but they would also mean she could help more people and potentially prevent situations like the coffee shop incident from happening to others. "What would be involved?" Sarah asked. "We'd set up regular classes at the community center David explained. Basic self-defense for women, maybe some sessions for teenagers, possibly even some training for business owners who deal with cash. We provide official city endorsement and insurance coverage. And in exchange, you help us train some of our officers in advanced defensive tactics, David said. We're a small department, and most of us never learned the kind of skills you have. We could all benefit from better training. Sarah realized that David was offering her exactly what she had been unconsciously searching for, a way to use her skills constructively while still living a relatively normal civilian life. It was an opportunity to serve her community without the complexities and dangers of military service. I need to think about it, Sarah said. Of course, David replied. Take your time. But I think you'd be surprised how much good you could do. After Officer Martinez left, Sarah sat alone in the garage thinking about his proposal. The idea of official classes appealed to her, but it would also mean giving up the anonymity she had been trying to maintain. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone entering the garage. She looked up to see Tom approaching, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a concerned expression. Saw David's patrol car outside, Tom said, handing Sarah one of the coffees. Everything okay? Everything's fine, Sarah assured him. He was asking about the self-defense classes. Tom sat down on a nearby stool. He's a good kid. Smart too. If he's taking an interest in what you're doing, it probably means he sees the value in it. Sarah sipped her coffee and looked around the garage that had become her second home. Tom, what do you think about me teaching these classes? Honestly, Tom was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. I think you're doing something important. I think you're helping people feel safer and more confident. And I think you're finding a way to use your skills for good. But Sarah sensed there was more. But I also think you're holding yourself back, Tom said gently. You have abilities that could help a lot more people than just the 4 women who come to our evening classes. What do you mean? Tom gestured around the garage. You're a brilliant mechanic, Sarah, but you're also something much more than that. You have knowledge and experience that could benefit the whole community. Sarah understood what Tom was saying, but she still had reservations. I came here to live a quiet life. And instead you found a place where you can make a real difference, Tom pointed out. Maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe this is where you're supposed to be. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about Officer Martinez's proposal. She discussed it with Emma, who was enthusiastically supportive, and with her other students, who all encouraged her to expand the program. Sarah also found herself paying more attention to the people in her community. She noticed how many women looked over their shoulders when walking alone at night. She saw how some people hurried through certain areas of town, clearly feeling unsafe. She observed the body language of people who had learned to live with a constant low level of fear. The more Sarah observed, the more she realized that Officer Martinez was right. There were a lot of people in her community who could benefit from feeling more confident and capable of protecting themselves. Sarah made her decision on a Thursday morning while she was working on a police cruiser that had been brought in for maintenance. As she checked the engine and replaced worn parts, she thought about how both mechanical systems and community safety required regular maintenance and attention to prevent problems. When Officer Martinez came to pick up the patrol car, Sarah was ready with her answer. I'll do it, she said simply. I'll teach the official classes and help train your officers. David grinned broadly. That's great news. When can we start? Give me 2 weeks to plan a curriculum and set up proper training protocols, Sarah replied. I want to do this right. Take all the time you need, David said. This is going to be good for everyone. Word of the official self-defense program spread quickly through the small town. Sarah was surprised by the number of people who signed up for the first round of classes. Women of all ages, from teenagers to senior citizens, registered for the basic self-defense course. Several local business owners signed up for the personal safety workshop, and even some of the high school students expressed interest in learning protective skills. Sarah spent her 2 weeks of preparation time developing a comprehensive program that would be safe, effective, and appropriate for people with no previous training. She researched liability issues, studied civilian self-defense methodologies, and even contacted some of her former military colleagues for advice. The night before the first official class, Sarah stood in the community center gymnasium looking at the space that would become her new classroom. She had arranged training mats, set up basic equipment, and prepared handouts covering everything from situational awareness to basic legal issues surrounding self-defense. Emma appeared beside her, carrying a box of water bottles for the students. "Nervous?" Emma asked. "A little," Sarah admitted. "This is different from the small classes we were doing at the garage." "Different how?" Sarah considered the question. "Bigger responsibility. More people counting on me to teach them something that could save their lives." Emma set down the water bottles and looked around the gymnasium. "Do you remember what you told me that first night when I asked you to teach me to fight?" "I told you it wasn't that simple," Sarah recalled. "But then you taught me anyway," Emma pointed out. "And now I'm not afraid anymore. Now I know I can protect myself if I have to." Sarah looked at Emma and saw the confidence that had grown over the weeks of training. The young woman who had once been terrified by 3 aggressive men was now poised and self-assured. "You did that," Emma continued. "You gave me back my confidence and my sense of safety. Tomorrow night, you're going to do the same thing for 30 other people." Sarah felt some of her nervousness fade away. Emma was right. This wasn't about her or her concerns. This was about helping people feel safer and more empowered. The first official class was held on a Tuesday evening in late September. Sarah arrived early to set up and was surprised to find a line of people waiting outside the community center. The class was supposed to start with 15 participants, but it looked like word had spread and additional people had shown up hoping to join. Sarah made a quick decision to accommodate everyone who had come, even though it meant a larger group than she had planned for. She introduced herself to the assembled students and explained the basic philosophy behind her teaching approach. "Self-defense is not about becoming a fighter," Sarah told the group. "It's about developing awareness, confidence, and a few simple skills that can help you stay safe. Most importantly, it's about changing how you think about your own capability and worth." The first class covered situational awareness and basic prevention strategies. Sarah taught her students how to observe their surroundings, identify potential threats, and position themselves advantageously in various situations. "The best fight is the one you never have to fight," Sarah explained. "If you can avoid dangerous situations through awareness and smart choices, you're already winning." She had the students practice walking with confidence, making appropriate eye contact, and projecting an image of alertness and capability. Sarah explained how predators typically looked for victims who appear distracted, isolated, or vulnerable. "Criminals are usually looking for easy targets," Sarah said. "If you look like you're paying attention and prepare to defend yourself, most troublemakers will look for someone else to bother." The second half of the class focused on basic physical techniques. Sarah taught simple strikes, blocks, and escapes that were designed to create opportunities to get away rather than inflict serious damage on an attacker. She emphasized the importance of practicing these techniques until they became automatic, explaining that in a real emergency situation, people needed to be able to react without thinking. "Your body needs to know what to do even when your mind is scared or confused," Sarah told her students. "That's why we practice the same movements over and over until they become natural." At the end of the first class, Sarah was approached by several students who had additional questions or wanted to share their own experiences with feeling unsafe. She listened to each person carefully, offering specific advice based on their individual situations. An elderly woman named Dorothy thanked Sarah for teaching techniques that were appropriate for someone with arthritis and limited mobility. A young mother named Lisa expressed gratitude for learning ways to protect both herself and her small children. A teenage girl named Amanda said the class had given her confidence to walk to her after-school job without feeling afraid. As the weeks passed and Sarah's program expanded, she began to see the broader impact of her work. Crime reports in the area showed a decrease in opportunistic attacks and harassment incidents. Local business owners reported that their employees felt safer, and several women began taking evening classes or participating in community activities they had previously avoided. Officer Martinez became a regular presence at Sarah's classes, both as a participant in the law enforcement training sessions and as a supportive observer of the civilian programs. The collaboration between Sarah and the police department proved beneficial for everyone involved. "You've changed this town," David told Sarah after one particularly successful training session. "People feel safer, and they're acting safer. That makes my job easier and our whole community stronger." Sarah had also found that teaching others was helping her process her own transition from military to civilian life. Working with her students reminded her daily that her skills could be used to protect and empower rather than simply to fight and defeat. The program continued to grow as word spread to neighboring communities. Sarah began receiving requests to travel and teach workshops in other towns, and several people suggested that she consider opening a dedicated training facility. One evening, as Sarah was cleaning up after a particularly large class, Tom appeared with his usual offering of coffee and conversation. "You know," Tom said, settling onto his usual stool, "when you first showed up here asking for a job, I thought you were just another veteran looking for a fresh start." "Wasn't I?" Sarah asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Maybe," Tom replied, "but I think you were also a solution looking for a problem to solve. This community needed someone like you, and you needed a community that would appreciate what you have to offer." Sarah considered Tom's words as she put away training equipment. When she had first arrived in this small town, she had been focused on what she wanted to leave behind rather than what she might find ahead of her. She had wanted to escape the violence and complexity of her military service, but what she had actually found was a way to use her experience constructively. She had thought she wanted anonymity and solitude, but what she had discovered was a community that valued her contributions and welcomed her leadership. "I never expected this," Sarah admitted to Tom. "When I came here, I thought I would just fix cars and live quietly." "Sometimes life has other plans," Tom observed. "Sometimes we end up exactly where we need to be, even when it's not where we thought we wanted to go." As Sarah locked up the community center that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that first morning at the coffee shop. She was no longer trying to hide from her past or deny her abilities. Instead, she had found a way to honor both her military service and her desire for a meaningful civilian life. Sarah was still a mechanic at Tom's garage, still the quiet woman who preferred black coffee and simple conversations. But she was also a teacher, a community leader, and a protector of people who needed protection. She had learned that she didn't have to choose between her military identity and her civilian aspirations. She could be both a former Navy SEAL and a small-town auto mechanic. She could use her skills to serve her community while living the peaceful life she had sought. Most importantly, Sarah had discovered that strength wasn't just about being able to defeat enemies in combat. Real strength was about using your abilities to help others become stronger, safer, and more confident. As she walked home that night, Sarah felt more settled and content than she had in years. She had found her place in the world, and it turned out to be exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new students to teach, new cars to repair, and new opportunities to serve her community. Sarah Martinez was home, and home was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had tried to run from who she was, but instead she had found a way to become who she was meant to be. The town that had welcomed her as a stranger had become the place where she could fully be herself, all parts of herself, integrated and purposeful. The woman who had once been told to be broken had discovered that she was unbreakable, and in refusing to be broken, she had become a source of strength for others who needed to believe in their own unbreakable spirit. Sarah's story was no longer about a former Navy SEAL hiding in a small town. It was about a strong woman who had found her calling in service to others, proving that the end of one chapter could be the beginning of something even more meaningful. She had learned that sometimes the most important battles are not fought on distant battlefields, but in coffee shops and community centers, in the everyday moments when good people stand up to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Sarah Martinez had found her mission, and it was exactly the mission she needed.